Okay, so last week, I think it was just D. We really took a look at uh, what what's usually called the Last Supper. It's the Passover meal, and then the Lord really initiates the cup and the bread of the new covenant that will be put in place. He calls it the testament because it has to do with the death of a testator. Testament, testator. You see the relationship between those two?
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to covenant. It's just called a testament because the testator is actually there talking about his death. Okay. And what happens, then they sing a hymn, and then they're ready to go out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus really tells something, he quotes some scriptures. And it's important to understand that Jesus is, there's a sequence of events, and most of these are the fulfillment of scriptures. Jesus knows exactly what's coming, doesn't he?
Yeah.
There isn't anything that's a surprise. So he prophesies about and he reads Matthew chapter 26, verse 31. Deborah, do you want to read that verse? Oh, actually, in 32. Okay. Matthew 31 and 32.
Then saith Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night, for it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee.
Okay, so Jesus tells him what's going to happen. It's prophesied that the shepherd would be the shepherd will be smitten, and then the sheep will be scattered. That's a quote from Zechariah chapter 13, verse 7. But Jesus, as he's telling them these things, he's also going to be interjecting some provision for them so that they have some comfort and hope. So through these tribulations, he's going to interject some hope for them, which they need, right? Because they're going to be scattered. And why are they going to be scattered?
Spread the word.
Say it again.
So they can spread the word?
No, well, that's going to happen a little bit later, actually. This scattering has to do with some fear and some uncertainty and some of those things.
Like when Peter was denying Jesus during that time.
Exactly. So this relates to uncertainty, fear, fatigue. I mean, sometimes when you're extremely tired, we don't function properly, do we?
Right.
They hadn't slept for 2 days. Jesus is going to take them out to the Mount of Olives, and they're going to fall asleep on them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to understand that there's things they don't understand. There's things they don't have in their memory. And we might say, well, why don't they understand and believe these things? What is the biggest, I hate to say hindrance, but what's the biggest lack of ability that they have right now that we have?
History.
History?
They don't know what's going to happen after we do.
That's true. We can look back at the scriptures. We know exactly what happened. We look out into the future. All the scripture's complete right now. So they don't really know what's going to happen.
We also have the spirit that they haven't gotten yet, so they don't really understand a lot of these things yet.
That's right. So they don't know what's coming, and they don't have the spirit to bring to remembrance everything that Jesus has taught. After when they get out there at Pentecost, all these things are going to be brought to their remembrance, and then they're going to be able to prophetically look out into the future because they're going to be filled with the Spirit. So there's a lot of dynamics here. But you're right, Trish. They don't know what's coming. We can look back and we know all these things. So the Lord Jesus is giving them some provision in the midst of all these warnings and what's going to happen to them. He tells them about the resurrection. Verse 32, after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. He's telling them, I'm going to be risen. But these things are elusive in their understanding, because when Jesus is in the tomb, they don't believe he's resurrected, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of not fully understanding things. Okay, so let's also look at let's all look over at Luke chapter 22. We have another provision that the Lord Jesus gives them. Luke 22. Terry, do you want to read Luke 22, verse 29 and 30?
Okay. And I appoint unto you a kingdom as my Father hath appointed unto me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel.
Okay, so the provision is some glory that's coming. You know, we understand some glory too, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
The sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that shall be revealed in us. So when we're going through tribulations, the comfort is to understand some glory that the Father is going to give us. And that's what Jesus is giving to them. Jesus is telling them they're going to be scattered. What's going to, you know, they're going to go out, and he's going to be arrested and some of these things. But in the midst of this, he's telling them about some glory. They're going to sit upon 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. When that earthly kingdom comes down to the earth, their hope has never been in the heavens, has it?
No,
it's on the earth. You know, the earthly kingdom is God's prophetic program with Israel. It's the reason it says the kingdom of heaven, it's a quote, it's taken from Deuteronomy 13, as the days of heaven on the earth. God's going to bring the heavens down to the earth. That's the program. That's the kingdom God's been preparing since the foundation of the world. When we talk about going to heaven, it's because of what the Apostle Paul lays out. That was a mystery. God's purpose for the heavenly places. That was never Israel's hope, was it? Their hope is an earthly kingdom centered over there in Jerusalem. Okay, a little sideline, but another provision that Jesus gives them is this. He prays for Peter. He prays for Peter. You know, and Peter will understand when he fails that Jesus is for him and that he can recover himself because Jesus is for him. So, Cheryl, do you want to read Luke 22, verses 31 and 32?
Okay. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren.
Okay, so you know, Simon is the head of the apostles. He's the chief of the apostles. You know, and he's the one that is really going to be the brunt of Satan's attack. We see that in early Acts period. Well, Jesus is telling Simon, you know what? I'm praying for you. This is what's going to happen, and this is the provision for you. Go ahead.
Simon is Simon Peter?
Simon Peter. Yeah, I
okay.
failed to connect the two. Simon Peter. Simon Peter. So okay. Verse 32, he says, I have prayed for thee that when thy faith fail. See, there was something that was failing in him. He failed to believe about his being arrested and being crucified and resurrected. He failed to understand and believe some things there. But Jesus says, and when thou art converted, he's telling Peter, you're going to recover yourself. You're going to remember who I am. You're going to remember God's provision for the 12 apostles, and you're going to recover yourself. You see how that would work in Peter? Mm-hmm. Peter is going to weep bitterly when he denies the Lord. But then he's going to begin to remember, you know what? Jesus told me this would happen. Jesus is for me. I can recover myself. I haven't lost my position with him. I haven't lost my position as one of the 12 apostles. And those doctrines are going to work in Peter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's important to see the provision that Jesus provides for the apostles as they're going through these things of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one other thing he provides, it's kind of a temporary provision, and we're not going to, it's over in Luke a few verses after what we just read. Jesus is going to say to get a purse and to get some swords. Kind of a temporary provision because they're going to be locked up hiding until Jesus is resurrected and comes to be with them. That's kind of a temporary provision, a purse and some swords, because they're going to be in fear, right?
Right.
So, Jesus understands what they're going through. He's providing what they need as they're going through these times of tribulation, just as Jesus is going through this tribulation. Okay. So, well, of course, Peter denies that he's going to deny the Lord. Verse 35, Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. This is Matthew 26:35. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. Sometimes we single out Peter, how he denies the Lord, but the others were saying the same things, weren't they?
Yeah.
It's easy to pick on Peter, but they all have the same frailties. Okay, so let's go on to let's move down to verse 36. We're going to read some verses, and then we're going to talk about this Jesus being exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Okay, so let's see. Dee, do you want to read a few verses?
Yes, I'll read.
Do you want to read Matthew 26, verses 36 through 39?
Yes. Then cometh Jesus with them until a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Then saith he unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt.
Okay, so, sometimes, and I'm going to say this, maybe it's not quite what we've thought or understood, but Jesus is not praying, I don't want to go to the cross. He knows with absolute certainty he needs to go to the cross, right?
Right.
Yes.
All the scriptures declare this. I mean, you can go back to Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53 and all the things he's been teaching up to this point, that he's going to be crucified, but he's also going to be resurrected. So he knows this was absolute certainty that he's going to the cross. This was foreordained from the foundation of the world. So he's not, well, I don't want to go, maybe I don't have to go type of thing. What the issue is, he is sorrowful, exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. These things are overwhelming him, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's easy to, we talk
Why
about
he
Jesus.
wanted his disciples to stand with him.
Exactly. And, and it's not like they're going to give him a great deal of comfort because they're somewhat confused and lacking, but he wants them to pray for him or to pray with him. But, it's easy to say, well, Jesus is God. He's God in the flesh. He's Emmanuel, but he was also, I shouldn't say was, he is also fully man, isn't he?
Right.
He has emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And, he had a perfect spirit. his mind was not corrupted by sin like ours, but he had emotions. But his emotions would have been kept in check by his perfect spirit and his deity. But these emotions are just raging within him because of a lot of, when we think about him going to the cross, there's a lot of issues involved, aren't there?
Mhm.
I wrote down just a few of them. His disciples are going to be scattered. He's going to be arrested, and there's going to be a false trial. He's going to go to the cross, probably the most cruel death mankind has ever devised. The shame and the agony is horrific. He's in a trial where he does not defend himself. They oftentimes tried to catch Jesus in his words. Could they ever do that?
No.
They never could, because he possesses all wisdom. He was despised and rejected of men, Isaiah 53. He's going to come under the Father's wrath as the Redeemer. He's going to be their sin bearer. His soul will suffer the anguish. He's going to be numbered with the transgressors. He's suffering as a criminal. He's going to come under the accusations of Satan when he's on the cross. He's going to stand toe to toe with Satan and under that condemnation. And all the time knowing that he had to endure this so that he could fully pay the price of redemption. So these things could anyone other than Jesus have endured these types of things?
No.
No, not at all.
Another thing I think about, and maybe you said it and I missed it, is that he becomes sin for us, which is so contrary to who he is. He takes every single man that was ever born in all generations, all of our sins, each one were placed on him. That alone would be weighty.
That's right. And because of that, the Father turned his back on the Son. Because Jesus prays, remember one of the things he prays, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So he was forsaken because he became sin. That's a very good point. He became sin. So we understand these emotions, and he's praying this cup would pass from him. This sorrow unto death would be taken from him, because you know what? He has to go to the cross. If he died from this overwhelming sorrow, Satan's won, right?
Right.
So he prays that this cup would be removed from him, and God Himself has provided some provision for Jesus. And it's important to know that Jesus relied upon these provisions. He relied upon them. Turn back to Isaiah. Hold your place there in Matthew 26, and turn back to Isaiah chapter 50. Isaiah chapter 50. And verse 8. Deborah, do you want to read Isaiah 50, verse 8?
He is near that justifieth me. Who will contend with me? Let us stand together. Who is mine adversary? Let him come near to me.
Okay. Jesus, this is prophetically something that's talking about Jesus. He is near that justifieth me. Now, here's the question. Did Jesus need to be justified like we need to be justified?
No.
No, we are justified in God's sight by our faith in the cross of Christ, that He died as our Redeemer. But Jesus, the justified that it's talking about, remember, words have different meanings. This justified talks about His fitness in the sight of God to function as Israel's Redeemer. He was fit. He was tempted. He never failed. He showed all the signs. He fulfilled all these scriptures. He was fit to be Israel's redeemer. So when he's hanging on that cross of Calvary, he is fit to function as Israel's redeemer. And then that verse says, and this is talking about the adversary, Satan, who will contend with me? Let us stand together. Who is mine adversary? Let him come near to me. You know what? Was Jesus afraid of the adversary?
No.
At Jesus' weakest moment, he calls to the adversary and he says, come on. You want to put it in modern vernacular, you want a piece of me? Come here. And you know what? I'm sorry, let me say this right. Satan is no match for Jesus at Jesus' weakest moment, because he's the perfect Son of God. And he has been justified by the Father as fit to function as Israel's Redeemer and as our Redeemer too, right?
Right.
As manifested through Paul's epistles. So, and this is all part of what Jesus is looking at, as he's in the garden. He knows these things are coming. So he understands that Satan is going to attack him at his weakest moment. And this really is, in the garden, is really the second time Satan comes against him. We saw the first time at the temptation in the wilderness, Matthew chapter 4. In the garden, we're going to see that Jesus says something about Satan. He says to the Pharisees and Sadducees, this is your time and the power of darkness. So this temptation is really the second time that Satan is really coming against him. And one of the reasons that Satan is really able to come against Jesus at this time is Jesus has entered into Satan's stronghold. Okay? Satan has a stronghold, and it's based in Jerusalem. And Jesus has been all through Israel casting out devils, right? Healing the sick. But Jerusalem, which is really going to be the city of the great king, has become a den of robbers. It's become Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets. This again is Satan's stronghold because of the religious leaders. Okay? And Jesus knows this. He's come into Satan's stronghold, and he knows what the religious leaders and Satan are going to throw against him. Okay? So let's turn back to Matthew 26. We're going to read some other verses. We're going to continue in Matthew 26. Any questions or thoughts on any of those things we've been talking about?
Nope.
Does that make sense? What's happening? I think we understand the picture. I'm just giving a few details.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm not telling you anything really that you don't know. Maybe I'm interjecting a few things that maybe are unclear, but I think we understand that all these things are coming against Jesus because of who he is and what he is going to accomplish. Okay. So Matthew 26, he's betrayed by Judas. Let's go down to Terry. Do you want to read Matthew 26? Let's see, verses 52 and through 54.
Okay. Then said Jesus unto him, put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. The feedback is distracting to me. Thinkest thou that I now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels. But how then scriptures fulfilled that thus it must be?
Okay, thank you. You know, could Jesus have called 12 legions of angels?
Yes.
He certainly could have. Would there have been any redemption for us or for Israel if Jesus had done that?
No.
No, there would have been no redemption. He would have not gone to the cross of Calvary, and there would be no redemption. And Jesus, in his mind, knows exactly what must take place, and that's what he says. But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled? He knew it was the only way. He understood the scriptures. Without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. He understood that Israel needed a redeemer. And that's what's in view, Israel's redemption. We understand that the cross of Christ provided for our redemption also, specifically laid out in Paul's epistles as the apostle of the Gentiles. Okay? So he knows he's fulfilling the scriptures as he's progressing in these last moments before the cross, and even onto the cross, and even after. These scriptures are being fulfilled. Okay. So, and he basically accuses them that are coming out against him. You know, I was in the temple teaching you day after day, and you did nothing. Right?
Right.
But they waited for a certain moment. And let's go down to let's see. Let's go over to the book of Luke, because Luke interjects some things that are not in Matthew that we want to focus on. Luke chapter 22. And, you know, Jesus, we didn't read about Jesus is the one who had the sword. And Luke records that he cuts off someone's ear.
Jesus had the sword?
No, Peter has the sword. Peter has a sword, and he cuts off one of the servant's ears, and you'd expect it from the doctor, right? Luke records how Jesus replaces his ear and heals his ear. Isn't that interesting how it's the physician that records that?
Yeah.
So Luke chapter 22, we want to read verses 52 and 53. Cheryl, could you read those two verses?
Then Jesus said to the chief priests and captains of the temple, and the elders which were come to him, be ye come out as against a thief with sword and staves? When I was daily with you in the temple, ye stretched forth no hands against me, but this of your hour and the power of darkness.
Okay.
This is your hour. Okay.
So Jesus brings up two things that we want to spend a little bit of time on. He says to the religious leaders, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. So there's two things there. One relates to the religious leaders, and one relates to Satan himself. Okay? Does that make sense? And so, you know, when Jesus began his ministry, at some point in time, hold your place here in Luke 22 and turn back to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12 is really might be the first place or time that the religious leaders actually say, we need to destroy this individual. Okay, it's Matthew 12. Let's start in verse 13. Then this is Jesus healing a man. Matthew 12:13. Then saith he to the man, stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole like as the other. And verse 14, then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. Okay, so really from that point to this point in Luke chapter 22, their goal has been to destroy Jesus, right? To
Right.
destroy him, to kill him, and to so that not just to that he would die, but so that he would be humiliated, that he would be scorned, rejected, so that nobody would follow him. So all these things from Matthew 12, when they went out and took counsel to kill him, have been leading up to this point in Luke chapter 22, Matthew chapter 26. This is your hour. Okay. This is the culmination of all these things they were trying to do, and they're being accomplished. Okay. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
They have finally gotten what they wanted. They arrest him, and they're going to have this false trial, and they're going to bring in false witnesses. What they're doing is they're completely violating that law that was given to them to obey. They're completely disregarding and disobeying the law.
And they are
That,
so convinced that he is not the Messiah.
that's right. And that, let's take a second and talk about that. Why do they not believe that he's the Messiah?
I think because they were talking, sorry, feedback, talking about a king coming. And
Okay.
he wasn't, and he didn't appear to be a king when he came.
That's a good point. He isn't what they thought they needed. They wanted this conquering hero maybe to do something to the Romans. They wanted somebody to come and pat them on the back, right? Oh, you're doing a great job. Keep it up. You know what? They didn't think they needed a redeemer. So there's a lot of factors, but you're right, Trish. He did not come as they thought he should appear to be, or that they wanted him to be. They had this cozy connection with the Roman government, and they were afraid Jesus would take away their place, that religious life that they had exalted, that self-righteous system that they'd been constructed for generations. So he is not at all what they wanted. He didn't come for the righteous. Who did he come for?
Sinners, for us.
He came for sinners. He didn't come for the righteous. They thought they were righteous. He came for sinners. He came for you and I, those that know they're sinners and need a redeemer. So this is their hour, okay? And we looked at that passage in Matthew, but I want to spend a little bit more time on this next phrase that Jesus brings up. He says, and the power of darkness. You know, when we think about Satan,
And this is in Luke.
Luke 22, verse 53. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. You know, when we think about darkness, what do we think about when we bring up that, when we read this phrase, the power of darkness? Any thoughts?
That's where fear resides.
That's right. Where there's darkness, you go out at night, you're afraid, right? It's dark. You don't know what's out there. There's fear, and there's no light. And when we think of light, that's truth, right?
Right.
There's no truth in Satan. He's the father of lies. Okay? He's the father of lies. He has been constructing the course of this world. You can go back to Genesis chapter 4. And he's been constructing the course of this world since that time. It was the way of Cain, that self-righteous religious system. There were other components. Genesis 4, you see murder, you see music. You know, how much of music is used for evil in the world? You see polygamy. you see ironworks, you see all these different things for weapons and all these different things. So this course of this world had been being constructed since Genesis chapter 4, and it has to do with darkness. There's no truth, and so we want to just take a look at that Satan had some power. Okay, not the kind of power God possesses, but he did possess some power. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 2. This is the writer of Hebrews looking back on Satan's power and how his power was destroyed by something Jesus did. Okay, Hebrews chapter 2. Verse 14 and 15. Trish, you want to read a couple verses?
Sure.
Hebrews 2, verses 14 and 15.
For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage.
Okay, thank you. You know, Satan had the power. Well, how does it say it here? He had the power of death. You know, it doesn't say that he was able to kill everybody or that he had the power of dying. He had the power of death. You know, when people died in the Old Testament, where did they go? Any thoughts? Did they go to heaven?
Purgatory.
Purgatory, that's what I thought too. But I thought that's not
No.
right. Some did, maybe.
They didn't go to heaven.
No.
Hell had two compartments. It had paradise and it had what we call hell, Hades, or fire. Right. But there was some power that kept them there. They couldn't come out. There were some things that prevented them from coming out, and Satan had the power to produce some fear. It's really this power of death produced some fear in people that they were never going to escape from that place. And we're not going to look at the scriptures, but there are scriptures that talk about hell and gates and doors, and there were barriers to coming out from hell. They were barriers. They couldn't come up. And he had that power. And when Jesus was on the cross of Calvary and he died, he went down to hell. Now, he didn't go down to hell like a lost person to suffer. He went down there for a purpose. But Satan having some power and possessing, that his hope was to keep Jesus bound down there.
Mm-hmm.
That was his hope, because the issue of the resurrection. If Jesus couldn't come up from those gates and those doors down there, there would be no resurrection, would there?
Right.
And that I just want to read that verse again in Hebrews. You may not still be there, but that's okay. Hebrews 2:15 says something very significant. It says, and deliver them who through death, Jesus through this death process.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let me go back to 14. 14 is what I wanted. I'm sorry. It says that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death. Through Jesus' death, he destroyed Satan that had the power of death. So it was through his death that he accomplished this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus down there, and you know what? Jesus now possesses the keys of hell and death, which tells me that at one time Satan possessed those things because there were gates. Those are in hell. Those are in the pit. But you know what? Jesus possesses them now, which would indicate to me that he took them away from Satan, because it was through this death process that he destroyed Satan, who had the power of death. Satan having this power to keep people from coming up, from being resurrected.
So during the time that Jesus was resurrected and walking around on the earth, what was there other people that were released from hell that were walking around on earth?
Okay, that's a good point. You know, it does say that when Jesus died, people came out of the graves, but they weren't resurrected. But people that had just died recently, some of them came up from the graves. They were what you'd call resuscitated. You know, we have resuscitating now, don't we? Where
Right.
somebody supposedly dies and they bring them back to life. That's the type of thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But so the scriptures talk about resurrections, but they're out there in the future. Israel has not been resurrected yet. We have not been resurrected yet. So Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection. Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 15. He's the first fruits. And what does first fruits mean?
Best.
The best. And that's true. It also means the first, right?
Yeah, the first.
It means there's more. But the best is a good one too. Best and first. He's the guarantee that there's more coming. Okay? So Jesus, through death, conquered him that had the power of death. Satan had this power to keep people in death. And remember, death's a creature. Death's a creature. And that creature is eventually going to be cast into the lake of fire. So that the bars and the gates were all part of that prison that Satan possessed. And through death, he conquered Satan. You know, Satan didn't die, did he? But he took away his power. The power of death, the power to hold people there. And does that make sense?
Yeah,
I know we're not
took away the
over.
power by taking the keys.
Say that again.
He took away the power by taking the keys.
That's right. And Jesus now possesses the keys. Turn over to Revelation.
A new sheriff in town.
Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1. And this is looking out into the future. John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. The Lord's day is the day of the Lord. It's the possessive case of the day of the Lord. The Lord's day, the day of the Lord. They're one and the same. It's not Sunday. Okay? The Lord's day. John was transported out there in the future. So John, this is what Jesus says to John, chapter 1, verse 18 in Revelation. I am he that liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and death. It's significant that he possesses them now. That power that Satan had, Jesus possesses all that power. Okay? Cool. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, we're not going through in a real detailed way. We're just trying to understand that Jesus is going into Satan's stronghold. The religious leaders, you know what? They're Satan's armor. The religious leaders are Satan's armor. Okay? The book of Luke, turn over to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. Actually, I'm sorry, it's Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11. I'm going to read this. Luke 11, verse 20. Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, But if I, with the finger of God, cast out devils, no doubt the kingdom of God is come upon you. When a strong man armed keepeth his palace, his goods are in peace. But when a stronger man than he shall come upon him and overcome him, he taketh from him all his armor wherein he trusted, and divideth his spoils. These religious leaders are part of Satan's armor. Just as also the key, having the keys of death and hell, were part of his armor, part of his defense, part of his stronghold. And through this death process where Jesus, you know what? When Jesus goes down to hell, this is important. He's going down as a conquering hero. He's not going down as a victim. So sometimes I think I've heard it said that, talks about Jesus suffering in hell. Jesus did not suffer in hell. He suffered on the cross. When Jesus died, it was paid in full. The sin debt was completely paid in full. He did not go down into hell to suffer. Redemption has been provided. He's going down as a conquering hero. He's going down to witness to some people, to some devils and some saints. And he's proclaiming to them some victory. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, sometimes, we hear things and we think, well, that sounds good, but sometimes they're just not right. So if you ever hear that about how Jesus suffered in hell, it's not true. He suffered on the cross of Calvary. And when he says it is finished, his payment for sin was completely and totally finished. He commends his spirit to the Father, says, Father, and what does he say? Into thy hands I commend my spirit. His relationship had been restored to the Father. He gives up the ghost. It wasn't taken from him. He gives up the ghost. He dies, and his soul goes into hell.
So when he came out,
go ahead.
When he came out of hell, did he bring people with him? I mean, not necessarily on earth, but to get them out of hell.
That's a good point. You mean the saints?
The believers at that time that had
Yeah,
died.
the believers. I think he did. Whether it was the moment he came up or a little time later, he certainly brought them up. Yes. That was one of the things that would be accomplished through his resurrection, that the saints would no longer see, now that the price of redemption has been completely paid, they are able to be in the presence of God. So I think that is a good point. They came up. What precise moment they came up, I'm not exactly sure, but they did come up.
Okay.
Because Revelation 6, go ahead.
It kind of reads that when he came out, they came with him because he released them. And I forget which one where it was. I think it was in Luke.
Right. And
when it said he came out, I can't read the verse. One of the verses that we read. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Revelation 6 says the saints are underneath the altar up in heaven. So He did bring them up. It was at the exact moment he came up. I don't know if it was an exact moment or sometime after, but they did come up because of his resurrection. And it's important to know that it was the cross of Christ that provided for the complete taking away of sins. Those saints that were saints in the Old Testament, they were forgiven, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
But what took away their sins?
Jesus' death.
Jesus' death. They were paid for, but they weren't completely taken away until the cross. Mm-hmm. And that's what Romans 3 talks about. Let's close with Romans 3. I know we've touched on a lot of things. And I hope it wasn't too confusing. Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter, and we'll close with this verse. Romans 3, verse 24 and 25, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in his blood, to declare his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. See, those remission of sins that are past through God's forbearance. God was forbearing, knowing the cross was coming, that the cross is what ultimately actually took away all their sins, even though they were forgiven by faith in the Old Testament. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. And if there's any questions,